Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. As always, joining me is the Prince of Twitter, the Regent of RedState.com, Andrew Malcolm at AHMalcolm on Twitter, and of course over at RedState.com is where you can find his VIP columns and occasionally his In the Clear columns over there too, especially dealing with his memories of working for 3 years as a reporter, because he's only, what, 28? Something
20,
like that.
yeah, 20, coming up on 28. Yeah.
Coming up on 28. So there you go. Which is the average age of the White House correspondent these days. But
yeah.
Speaking of age, we got to get to the bottom of something here, Andrew. This story dropped for me.
Oh, this is terrible.
So there's Joe Biden walking across the tarmac, I guess, near the White House. I guess he's going out to Marine One or coming back. And there's this little video clip where he just kind of stands with his legs kind of bent and looking like he's, kind of locked in. And Matt Vespa has a piece up over at Town Hall saying, this sort of looks like what toddlers do when they are
filling their pants. Yeah.
Filling their pants. Yes, I'm trying to come up with a classy way of saying this. I don't know that that's what's going on, but it certainly looked weird. I mean, that was a strange. It's just sort of frozen in place, and he had this weird look on his face.
And his legs were kind of spread.
His legs were spread, and it was a weird, awkward moment, regardless of what you think was the cause of that. That was a weird, awkward moment.
There seem to be a lot of those with him these days. And I mean, it's serial. Every time we see him in public or on the way to go public or talking, he screws it up somehow. He forgets the words, he garbles the words. He starts off on a memory and then says, anyway. I think that's going to be on his gravestone someday. Is it Joe R. Biden? Anyway.
Well, maybe.
Yeah. But the thing is, I mean, this has been going on for some time. We saw the early indications of his failing mind and body back in 2019 and 2020 during the campaign, where he would suddenly get angry and furious at people at a town hall, and he'd start calling them names, or he'd ask Iowa what the thought of Ohio's infrastructure. And remember when he told that black radio host, if you don't vote for me, you're not black. It's just spent so much time in his basement and knock off many days at around 10 or 10:30 in the morning. So, obviously there's something going on. He's taken 40% of his term. He's taken on vacation. So they're doing something when he goes to Delaware. And that happens to be, look, where his guests and visitors and activities are not recorded. There could be doctor treatments, there could be medical treatments, there could be all kinds of things going on. As long as he doesn't leave his house, the pool doesn't know about it. So, but the thing is, Ed, and I think you and I may have mentioned this before, nobody does anything about it. I mean, this guy has the nuclear launch codes, access to them. And we're just kind of, look at him. He's so old. He's incapable. But he's in commander-in-chief. Yeah. I mean, and there's no one, people around him don't want him to step down because they'd lose their spot of prominence and power too. It's very disturbing. And the world, well, starting, as you point out, starting with Afghanistan and that debacle, the world saw him. It was a mortifying experience for the United States, but the world saw that weakness. They've seen it many other times at international meetings. Australia has a regular feature on their TV networks of how he screwed up recently. So the weakness in the American leadership is well known around the world. Now, if it's an ally, it's kind of like, oh boy, I hope they get somebody else in there. But if it's an adversary, it's like, you know what, guys, we've got about 8 more months before to take advantage of this before it's over. I hope people remember Putin annexed Crimea and took over eastern Ukraine in 2014. And then when Trump was in office, he did none of that. And a month or 2 weeks after Trump left office, then Putin starts assembling the troops and equipment for the invasion of Ukraine. So, China's looking at Taiwan. North Korea has got ambitions. There's all kinds of things that could go on, and we're weak. We're vulnerable now with this leadership. Can you imagine a 3 a.m. call? I mean, he's not that wide awake when he's awake.
Well, it's kind of your one of your posts are about.
Yeah. Oh, hey, I did that accidentally.
Yeah, with one high-profile exception, Americans are losing sleep, and it's the one high-profile exception is Joe Biden stretched out at Rehoboth Beach, where he's at a lot. What's interesting about this, and what's interesting about that whole video thing, even if you don't subscribe to the theory that the presidential diaper needed changing all of a sudden after this, is that it's still, this sort of stiff-legged movement and clear difficulty in mobility now is something that Americans are very familiar with. Anybody who's had to deal with with an aging parent has seen that, right? And it's getting pronounced. I mean, this is not just, it's a thing here, a thing there. They've had to adjust the stairs on Air Force One so he doesn't have to walk up so many of them. They've given him those really super broad shoe soles to stabilize him. And now they're kind of surrounding him with people as he's walking in and out to Marine One, the helicopter.
So you don't see his funny gait. What that's an old man gait.
Yep.
I probably have done that. He's a little older than I am, but I've probably done that. What you do is you slide your foot forward. It looks like, well, it is a shuffle. You slide your foot forward, and that's when you're feeling uncertain about your balance. So the worst thing he could do now is fall again. But he slides his foot forward, and what that does is there's no up in the air time for the foot. So it's kind of like in maintaining his contact with the ground for safety and security reasons. And I understand, the second largest cause of death for elderly is falling.
Right.
So, but he's president. I mean, this isn't something we're sentenced to endure, but the party and his staff, they want to stay in place. So nobody does anything. And Democrats in Congress, not impeachment, but what do you call it? The where you get the vice president in.
25th Amendment.
25th Amendment. Yeah, that can start with a member of the cabinet or Congress. They could start that.
Yeah, I think it has to start with the cabinet, but yeah, I mean, either way, this is clearly, there's some incapacitation here that's going on, and you're right. It's coming out in the way that people perceive the United States now, and this is the reason why, and today we're talking about Israel is apparently launching the operation in Rafah. Hamas is trying to forestall it by claiming that they've agreed to a hostage swap. And it turns out,
don't attack. We'll have a ceasefire. You have a ceasefire.
Yeah, but on our terms. We'll have a ceasefire, but on our terms, not the
That's
ones
right.
that you agreed to already.
Yeah.
So I mean, Israel's not playing that game right now, and Joe Biden had a phone call apparently with Benjamin Netanyahu a few hours ago. As we're recording this, we're recording it on Monday and it goes up on Tuesday, and apparently the White House is now saying just now as we're recording this that John Kirby said that Biden made clear to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu today that he's against a ground operation in Rafah. Well, he probably told him, don't, which is what he told Iran, don't. And nobody's paying attention to this guy because he's clearly not, he's clearly non compos mentis and nobody's really paying attention to him. And
right.
he's not helping our allies and he's not discouraging our enemies. This guy is a problem.
And he suspended ammo shipments to Israel. Hello.
Yeah. I mean,
what kind of ally is that?
A bad ally. The Israelis too. I mean, the Israelis have been holding off on this Rafah operation for at least a couple of months. They've had the assets in place to do this. They've been holding off basically because they're trying to help Joe Biden out a bit here and trying to allow negotiations to take place to see if they can get Hamas out of there without doing any more damage. Hamas clearly isn't going to leave, and the Israelis knew that, but they wanted to give Joe Biden some time to see if, just to try everything that they could so they could, no one could accuse them of jumping the gun on this. Well, they're in the middle,
which they will anyway. Yeah,
they're already starting to do this, right? Yeah. They're in the middle of negotiations, and what does Hamas do in the middle of negotiations? They fire rockets at the Keren Shalom crossing, which is where a lot of the aid for southern Gaza is going in, and kill 4 Israeli soldiers who are there just to secure the aid. And the reason why is because the aid wasn't going directly into Hamas's hands, which is what Hamas wants. They were trying to get it distributed so that Hamas didn't have anything to do with it. So they attacked the crossing. And what is, Tommy Vietor, who was a Obama era White House flack, is saying, oh, well, the Israelis are attacking, instead of negotiating. And there's a reason for that. It's because Hamas fired on the aid operation. They're tired of this. They want to get this over. The longer they have to sit there and wait, the more vulnerable their people become. And they're tired of it. And Israel apparently decided today that they've had enough of it, and that's the end of it. They're going to still send negotiators. They're saying today they'll send negotiators back to Cairo to talk more, but they're not going to hold off any longer. If Hamas wants to, if Hamas wants to stop the war, then they can surrender and leave. And that's the only
going to happen. Yeah,
right. They're not going to do that, and Israel's not going to let them stay. This is something that's going to have to get fought out, and this is part of what's
exactly
with the American response to this. Hamas is a terror network. They want to wipe Israel off the face of the map. They want to kill all the Jews. They're genocidal. They're aligned with one of our key enemies, Iran, and they are not going to stop. We gave them 17 years of trying to become a governing party in Gaza, and this is where we're at. And so the only answer to this is to stop freezing this conflict in place and let them fight it out and see who wins, because that's the only way that this is going to come to an end. And I mean, this is a waste of time that we've wasted 3 or 4 months. This thing should have been over in January. And Biden is the reason why it isn't.
That's right. Exactly right. And so what he's doing now for what? A handful of Muslim votes in Michigan is pretending that he's against this.
I don't think he's pretending. I think he really is against it. And so is the media. I want to read something from somebody that I don't usually quote, okay? And from a source that I don't quote very often from, which is The Atlantic. And this is today, Jill Filipovic, or Filipovitz, I'm not sure how she pronounces it, um, just took a huge slap at the media today. The title of this is "Say Plainly What the Protesters Want." And I'll just read a little bit of this. The Washington Post recently published an article headlined, "They Criticized Israel. This Twitter account upended their lives." The story, by the reporter Pranshu Verma, looked at the organization Stop Anti-Semitism, which, according to the Post summary, quote, has flagged hundreds of people who have criticized Israel's actions in Gaza. Many were swiftly fired, end quote. But that's not actually an accurate description of the reality that the Post is reporting. The people in this article did not simply criticize Israel or its actions in Gaza. One woman was fired from her job at a branding firm for a video in which she declared that radical solidarity with Palestine means not apologizing for Hamas. Another person, a therapist, was caught on video ripping down a poster of Israeli hostages. She subsequently promoted the conspiracy theory that the Israelis taken by Hamas on October 7 were actually kidnapped by their own country. The story mentions two other people whose lives were upended because they criticized Israel. There's more here. In every single case, they try to paint the most sympathetic version possible of the people who are anti-Jewish bigots. They're anti-Semites.
Who started it? Who started it?
Right, exactly.
On October 7th. I mean, Israel didn't say, "Oh, come on in." It's
right. Well, this is what Joe Filipovic says too. I mean, and this is where I want to throw this at you here. News outlets have a duty to both accurately report the news and include the context necessary for readers to understand it. The Post article not only casts the whitewashing of Hamas and the murders it committed as criticism of Israel, it also fails to explain Hamas's aims, which include the complete destruction of Israel by any means, including the mass murder of innocent civilians. What happens to public discourse around the most controversial issues when the media outlets don't talk about what we're actually talking about?
Yeah, exactly. And that is a major reason why there's so much distrust, or put it another way, so little trust of the media these days. It's just, there's so many times that people have seen for themselves what the situation is, and then they read the media account, and it's just totally different. It's just totally different.
Well, and again, this gets back into something we've talked about for a very long time. That there's simply no reporting any longer. It's all about
a narrative.
It's all about the narratives, right? It's all about the activism. It's really what it is. It's all about the activism. These are people who are claiming journalism, but in reality are just fomenting the Marxist revolution. And that's the same thing that's true of these college protests too. They're seizing on, this conflict, not because I'm sure some of them love Hamas and are blatantly anti-Semitic and want to see Israel destroyed, but mostly it's just because in their minds, they've been fed this nonsense that Israel is the occupier of lands that Jews have been on for 3,500 years, and that the Arabs who, swept through and actually did occupy that area, North Africa and Spain at one point, are somehow the indigenous tribes of this area. And so therefore, in the Marxist, Leninist, the neo-Marxist framework, Israel is the occupier and they're the class that has to be destroyed. And because Arabs are brown people, they have to be the sympathetic people. That's all this really is. That's all that's driving this nonsense on campus.
And along the way, they certainly are eager to destroy American institutions.
Yeah.
And that was the subject of my column on Sunday, which was, you think this occupation of campuses is bad and even a little bit violent. Well, they're already planning to do this at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, to repeat the 1968 experience. And guess what, Ed? Within 1 week of the actual anniversary, 56th anniversary of the riot at the Democratic Convention in 1968, where I was working, I mean, it's just so stunning. And I suppose, equal opportunity, I suppose they're going to take on the Republicans a month before, just 92 miles north in Milwaukee. But that's what I wanted to write about, was recalling 1968, which I don't think many people do, and recalling the 1960s, which were a very violent time.
Yeah. And the
Uh,
1960s.
I understand today Bernie Sanders compared, said that this campus activity could be Joe Biden's Vietnam. I, I mean, there
Yeah.
are 58,000 people killed in Vietnam, Americans, thousands more Vietnamese on both sides. And something I didn't know, there were 386 murders of Americans in Vietnam by Americans. No, I'm sorry, it was 386 suicides, 285 murders. I mean, what an awful time. Plus assassinations. Kennedy, his brother, Martin Luther King, attempt on Wallace, which I guess was a little bit later. Bombings. Some of Obama's friends were involved in the Weatherman bombings. It was a terrible time. City riots, billions of dollars in damage, and scores killed them in those. So it has nothing to do. There isn't, well, maybe a glimmer of similarity to 1968 or Vietnam, but
well, I think in style, and I think that this is part of what's going on too, right? This is 1968 envy. There's a lot of that on campus, isn't it? There has been a lot of that. A lot of these, and this isn't the first season of unrest in the United States in the last 20 years. We had some of this around the Iraq War, and there was a lot of legit dissent about the Iraq War. I'm not casting that as all.
Occupy Wall Street.
Occupy Wall Street is a great example of this. The 2020 George Floyd riots all across the country is another example of that. And again, these are all leftist groups. Antifa's done this now for at least 10 years and maybe longer than that. Various different causes that they get behind, and they always make it into, they always go outside the boundaries of legal process. Let me just put it that way. And the reason is the same thing. Adam likes to say the issue is not the issue, and he's right. It's the revolution. It's not, it's not the issue at hand. It's the greater issue, and that's what pulls these kids in, because they're being indoctrinated into that type of thinking. That come the revolution, we're going to line all these people up against the wall. What was it? I'm trying to remember what it was that I was referring to today, but not too many colleges apparently teach what happened to Maximilien Robespierre, right? I know it was Jonathan Turley was talking about the French Revolution, right? And I was putting his comments up in the headlines. I don't think it's up yet, but it will be by the time this airs. And it was about the guillotine. I think at George Washington University they had a public tribunal, or people's tribunal, and convicted the administrators of whatever, genocide. And people were chanting for the guillotine. And I think if George Washington University had taught about the reality of the French Revolution, there'd be a lot less enthusiasm for calling for the guillotine, because Robespierre himself was one of the big champions of the guillotine as a measure of social justice in the French Revolution. And he was in power for exactly 1 year and 1 day, at which point they separated his head from his shoulders because he was insufficiently revolutionary, which is how you end up with Napoleon, right? He just comes in with cannons, just starts firing down the street and seizes power because of the chaos. Nothing good comes out of this, and the revolution always eats its own. But that's what's going on in these campuses.
That's right, eats its own. It eats its own. And I think that's what worries a lot of people. And it's based on the weakness of the president that invites this. There's no strong response. You know, even back in a post-Civil War era, when the Klan and others were barring blacks from voting, which they had the right to do then, Ulysses Grant, he sent in federal troops. I mean, that's back then, for Pete's sake.
Mhm.
To him, it's just
Yeah, you can't
it's
like chaos. You can't like chaos fester. I mean, I've been through.
yeah.
I've been in proximity to two major riots in my lifetime. One was in Los Angeles in 1992, and the other was in Minneapolis in 2020. In both cases, they let the violence fester until they couldn't contain it any longer. Whereas a strong initial response probably would have prevented almost everything that transpired afterwards.
That's right. Exactly right. And it's the same. I mean, you go back to raising children.
Yeah.
We were talking about a toddler early on. If you snuff out I misbehaved once publicly, insulting two elderly women who were dominating the party phone line. And it turns out there was only one little boy on that party phone line. And for some reason, the finger of guilt was pointed at me. And I anticipated severe punishment. And my father, I told you this story before, but my father took me into the dining room and he knelt down in front of me and he looked me in the face with the most serious look I can remember. And he said, "We don't do that." And guess what? Here I am, however many years later, talking about it because it was seared into my mind. And that's the power that dads have that is lacking in many families. But
Yeah.
but it's we don't do that. We don't do this on this campus. And this is a generation of young people whose parents, in many instances, wanted to be friends instead of parents.
Yeah.
This generation, when I lived in Connecticut, the police would raid teenage keg parties, and parents would go down to the police station to protest because it was their kids. And the police said, "They're 17 and 18. They're not, it's not allowed. 16
Yeah.
and 17. So they were, in effect, endorsing this kind of behavior. They said, well, they were on the beach, they weren't driving. They said, well, how do you think they got there? How do you think they're going to get home? So this is a much larger picture, as you said earlier. It's a much larger picture than simply these paid instigators, in many cases, fomenting and intimidating students on campuses.
Yeah. This is
And it's not going to end. It's not going to end until there's a firm response. Have you seen the campuses where there was a firm response? It's over.
yeah. Yeah. Where there was a firm response up front, like in
Up front,
Florida,
yes, yeah, right,
in Texas. Yeah. Yeah. They just haul them out of there. And this is the I talk about this on some of the other podcasts. I think I may have even mentioned it last week, the Huntington Beach precedent. I used to live in Huntington Beach, and they have a surf contest there every 4th of July. It's a big deal. It's a major professional surf contest there. At least they did when I was living there. And for a few years in a row, they had riots because people would come from all over the place to cause trouble. And they'd have riots on the beach, and every year they'd have to clean everything up. And people in Huntington Beach were getting fed up. And finally, the police and the city council got fed up too. And one year they warned everybody, don't come down here and start trouble. Well, they'd been doing that for a while, and then nothing ever really happened. Well, that year they hired a bunch of extra cops, brought in a bunch of extra cops, and arrested anybody that caused any trouble right up front. As soon as you started causing trouble, they just arrested you. They hauled you off the beach, hauled you off the sidewalk, whatever it was, threw you in a paddy wagon or whatever you want to call it these days, and they let you sit there for a couple of days. They didn't book them right away. They have 48 hours. I believe it's 48 hours in California to book people. And they deliberately waited so that these people couldn't just get right back out and bail and go back out in the street. They made them sit there for a while and think about their life choices. And people were screaming about oh, this is fascist. This is awful. And you know what happened the next year?
Nothing.
Nothing.
That's right.
Because everybody who was going to cause trouble didn't come, because they knew that Huntington Beach was going to stick them in jail for a couple of days, and they couldn't afford to lose that much time.
Yeah.
And so nothing, absolutely. I mean, then you had just the normal stuff, which police can handle, but we didn't have the next year.
I mean, I'm sorry to, I guess it's just being honest about it. Humans behave when there are consequences for misbehaving.
Absolutely.
That's the deal.
That's the deal.
I mean,
it's all about incentives. You can either set incentive structures that reward people for behaving, or you can set up incentive structures that reward people for misbehaving. And if you do the latter, you really can't complain too much when things fall apart like they have at Columbia. There's a thing today. It's over at Powerline. It's a letter from 13 federal judges to Minouche Shafik, who's the president of Columbia. And these 13 judges told them, unless you make these series of changes at Columbia, we will not hire Columbia law school graduates or Columbia graduates of any kind. And these are 13 federal judges who are speaking up. If you ever,
there's others. Yeah.
If you ever worked in customer service, the rule of thumb was, out of 20 customers who are dissatisfied, only one's really going to speak up and say something to you about it. So if you get one phone call, there's 19 others that are waiting to tell you the same damn thing about your service. And my guess is that there's a whole lot of people now who are looking at Columbia University and becoming very convinced that these people aren't getting an education, they're getting an indoctrination, and they don't want to have to deal with the prima donnas, these, vapid, intellectually stunted prima donnas that Columbia is producing. That's a rational response. That's not just a retaliatory response. There's no really good reason to hire Columbia graduates at this point based on what they're seeing on the campus of Columbia.
And realistically, Columbia isn't the only place that's doing this. So it's going to rub off, I suspect, on
Harvard, Yale, Penn, MIT,
Princeton,
Princeton, they've all been doing this, and it's not just them. UCLA is another one. John Andrasik, our really good friend John Andrasik, he had just done an interview with me about being over in Israel when Iran was shooting the missiles over, and he was at a UCLA function. He's a alumnus of UCLA. He's a graduate from there. I think he said class of '88. And
he's with Five for Fighting, right?
Five for Fighting, yeah. I mean, he's the lead singer and songwriter for Five for Fighting. And he delivered like a 6.5-minute speech at a function there, at an alumni function, basically demanding that UCLA's chancellor, Gene Block, and its board explain what they're going to do to restore UCLA's reputation and honor. And I'm going to bet that nobody reaches out to John about this. It's a great 6.5-minute video. I retweeted it out when John sent it over to me. But that's what it's going to take. It's going to take the alumni of these schools, the parents of current students of these schools, taking market action to punish these schools for their incentive structures.
See, the billionaire owner of the Patriots, Kraft, he says he's not going to support Columbia anymore. It's not the school he knew.
Yeah. And he was a big time donor over there too. There's a center named for him over there. In fact, it's a center for Jewish students that's named for him at Columbia. Yeah, absolutely. So, yep, incentives matter. And I think we've given you guys enough incentive to go over and read Andrew's column over redstate.com.
Yeah.
So, Andrew, you've had some great segues today. I
do my best, Ed. I know I'm carrying you most weeks, so.
It's true, though. It's true.
No, it's not. No, it's not. No, it's
So
not.
I don't really have a good segue. We just got to get to the jokes of the week. Do you have any jokes
Yeah,
today?
I got a couple here. Let's see. These are old. Jay Leno says a new census report reports that 1 in 6 Americans are now Hispanic. The other 5 are also Hispanic. They're just not Americans. New study, this is Jimmy Fallon. A new study found that 45% of adults still have sibling rivalries. And guess what? I read that like 3 days before my sister.
Yeah, that'd be fun. My sister and I do that. So yeah, that'd be. I have to try to remember that for myself.
Yeah. I think that may be. Here, one other one. Jay Leno. Dorothy Young died recently at age 103. She was the stage assistant for the magician Harry Houdini. And her last words were, ta-da!
Actually, it would be pretty good for last words. All right, I got a couple for you. A longer one and a very short one. So I'll go with the longer one first. So coach calls a kid over, baseball, Little League baseball coach calls a kid over and he says, do you understand what cooperation is, what a team is? And the little boy says, yeah. He says, do you understand that it matters that we win together as a team or lose together as a team? And the little boy nods. He says, so when a strike is called, or if you're out at first, you don't argue or curse or attack the umpire. Do you understand all that? And the boy says, yes, I understand all that. He says, good, go over and tell your mother. Now that's a joke that unfortunately is a little too realistic. And anybody who's been in those
yeah, exactly right.
All right. Here's my short one, and we'll wrap up. Cockroaches are found to be capable of surviving a nuclear holocaust, yet one swat with a newspaper and it would die. That's how toxic the media is.
That's pretty good. Pretty good. Yeah, that's right. In Japan, the cockroaches are this big.
I didn't know Japan was part of Texas.
Yeah, right. But you can actually hear them scribbling across the floor. You can actually hear them down the hall. And when you hit them, it's like a green sludge.
You know what? That's also.
So I just what?
Arizona and Texas.
Yeah. Are they? Yeah.
Arizona. I mean, when I was in Arizona, those things were huge, and they would crawl up through the drain, and I could hear them scurrying around in the back.
Yeah, exactly.
Here I am a 29, 30-year-old guy, big strapping guy, big at least. I don't know about strapping, but certainly big. I mean, that scared the crap out of me. I go in there and I'd have my shoe up, and I'm thinking, if I don't hit it just right, it's going to grab my shoe and come after me. That's how big these.
That's right. That's right. They were. Remember the Woody Allen movie where his girl Diane Keaton calls him over, and she said there's a spider in the bathtub, and so he goes in with his shoe, and then he comes running out, and he says it's the size of a Buick.
I think that was Annie Hall. Yeah. No, thank you. No, thank you.
No.
We don't need that. All right. Andrew Malcolm, the Prince of Twitter, the regent of redstate.com. Go over to Red State. Check in on the VIP stuff that he's doing over there. Go to Twitter at @AHMalcolm. Find out all the different things that he's tweeting out, because he tweets out a ton of good stuff. You should be following him and watching him every single day. Andrew Malcolm, we'll do this again next week, sir.
Okie doke. I'll see you then.